hope you're doing well. Today I have a game for you in the London system that I'm excited to talk about, so let's go ahead and just jump straight in. In this game, I have the black pieces, and I'm currently rated at 1952. I'm playing against dormantpatzerino, who's rated 1967, and the opening move is 1d4. And in this, I play the Nimzo Indian, so I start with knight to f6. And then the bishop comes out to f4, signifying the London opening, which is an opening that I really don't have too much of a thought-out plan for yet. It's something that I'm still working on. So in this, it's just kind of me trying to figure out what I want to do here. So I decided to kind of play with the Nimzo-esque idea of just playing e6 to allow this bishop to come out, and preparing a stronger d5 to control the center. So he continues with e3, pretty normal London idea. Again, just building the structure. It's called the London system for a reason. It's because you can just pretty much play the same moves, and you're going to be okay. So at this point, we're just developing. There's not really a whole lot going on. So this is a move that I kind of want to talk about a little bit. And at first glance, this move stops my bishop from developing. But with this pawn chain, this bishop really isn't going anywhere. So my plan here is to eventually free up the b7 square and put my bishop going in this direction. And this knight move also supports a c5 push, which I'm looking to do since I control that square well now. So he plays this move. And I thought this was kind of interesting because I also play 1d4 with white. And the Slav is an opening that I see pretty commonly. And in the Slav, there's a maneuver where white moves the f3 knight to attack the light square bishop that's outside the pawn chain, in a similar pawn chain to this, with this setup. But I noticed this actually in the game too, that I don't have this move because the queen covers that square. I can never play h5. So it was just kind of like a little interesting difference that I saw here. And so he plays h3, allowing this dark square bishop to come back to h2 whenever needed. And this move is to prepare a knight f3, because otherwise if you play knight f3 before playing h3, then it does cut the queen and allow knight to h5, attacking this bishop and likely winning it. So he's trying to avoid that with this, so I continue with the c5 plan, knight to f3, and now h3 or h6 rather. And the idea behind this is to restrict white's pieces, to try to stop this knight jump, stop the bishop from coming to this square. Just generally trying to restrict the pieces. At the same time, this can be a common battery in these types of systems. So I'm just removing the pawn from the square so there's no capture if this knight ever falls or moves away. So queen comes to e2. I play... Okay, so this is the first kind of inaccuracy of the game, as you can see here. Now, my intentions with a6 was to... Okay, again, it can be restrictive, but the main purpose was to play b5 and bishop to b7 and develop the bishop on this diagonal. I don't know if this diagonal is necessarily going to open up anytime soon, but it at least puts the bishop on a decent square, gets it off the back rank so I can connect my rooks. Now, one thing that I did notice in the game is this dark square bishop does control b8, so I can never put my rook behind this pawn to try to break the queen side. And again, this is another intention to try to break down this pawn structure. So I expand, he falls back to h2 with the bishop, putting in the nice little cubby, controlling this diagonal for the rest of the time. So then I just develop my bishop, and the knight jumps to the center of the board here. And here, I was thinking quite a bit at this point in the game, and I didn't want to take this knight because I figured the bishop just captures it, and I haven't really accomplished anything. And I'm not. Oh shoot! I thought this was like an actual game, so I got actually scared there. Even the mouse slips in an analysis can be scary. Um, but anyways, so if he takes here, I'm not too worried about it, right? Because this is a good piece for him right now. So I was kind of thinking of in more long term strategy here, and this bishop is very nice here, and this bishop is very nice. And my bishops aren't that great for right now. Right? This bishop isn't looking at much. This bishop's stuck behind the pawn chain. So my thought here was to try to restrict my opponent's light square bishop from controlling this diagonal. And my thought in the game was I play here. If the knight captures and pawn captures, the scope of my light square bishop gets extended by at least a little bit here, and this light square bishop gets pushed back and is kind of out of the game for a little bit. And then if the light square bishop captures, then I take with the pawn, and now I've achieved the bishop pair, but the position's still relatively closed. And this knight is still strong. But I can always trade the knight. So this is what I go for in the game. I go knight to e4. He decides to capture with the bishop. Of course, I capture back with the pawn. And then we enter this whole trade sequence. And this is kind of like the first of really two like big trade downs that happen in the game. It's kind of like a big build-up, a bunch of trades, another build-up, and then some trades. And unfortunately, I kind of end up coming out on the losing end in most of these. I had the worst planning. But okay, so the knight moves here, hitting the dark square bishop immediately. So I just return to the home square, or the square that I started on e7. And my intention here was to maybe even maneuver this guy around. I could also challenge this bishop. What I didn't want to do is come here right away because of a rook pin to my queen, and I didn't want to have to deal with any of that. But I did see that I had this move to cut the file if needed, which it turns out was needed pretty quickly. And this bishop now is getting better. It has some targets here, and it does a good job of cutting the file from the rook and controlling these pawns. It's a pretty safe square. So I'm not unhappy with this bishop, and well, we'll move on a couple moves here before I hit the next point. But okay, the knight comes to the center, all right, just controlling some squares, getting ready for some knight jumps, doing things that knights like to do. I brought the rook to the c file. I really didn't know where I wanted my rooks in this situation, but I was planning on trying to keep the d file closed as long as possible. Now, a plan that I could have gone for was trying to bring all my major pieces over to the d file and somehow kick this knight and then move my bishop away and attack the rook behind. But I decided to I wanted to go for a minority attack on the queen side here. This is kind of the plan that I've had from the beginning, from when I played a6 b5. So this was kind of a plan in my head. It would be better to be more flexible here. But b4 here is just a flat-out mistake. I got way too impatient. I wanted to try to make something happen because I felt like that I was losing. And I wanted to try to open the position for my bishop pair. But unfortunately, it's too soon. I'm not ready for this sort of push yet. And after captures, I want to use this newly open file to attack the b pawn. But as I mentioned earlier, this bishop conveniently covers the b8 square. So my plan here, after the knight moves, is to come back with the bishop to trade off the bishops, the dark square bishops, so I can attack here. But this, of course, is a strategic mistake, allowing the bishop pair to be led up. And this bishop, he controls this diagonal, but really it's out of the game for much of what's going on because it's only on one diagonal and there's not a ton of squares that I can use. So this trade is just a strategic mistake. After captures. Now, a move that I missed that I wanted to talk about here actually was this move f5. And this move comes into play. It was suggested when I went back to analyze this pretty commonly in this position, because it's very nice to gain the tempo on the queen, right? Make the queen move wherever. Okay, I guess I should highlight a square that's not attacked, right? So f5, the queen has the move, probably to g3. But the point of this also, from a structural standpoint, is now the pawn on e4 is supported by another pawn, and I get this nice little pawn chain going, which frees up my bishop to go do wonderful things in other parts of the board. And with the absence of white's light square bishop, the king sitting on h7 becomes relatively safe, or actually pretty safe, because the light squares are covered by the pawns here, and there's no light square bishop to try to attack this diagonal, possibly like with an f3 break, for example. But I missed this entire strategic idea in the game, and I went for this. I was just too stuck on wanting to play this minority attack. So takes. The knight drops back, revealing the pin on the bishop here. And then I go for this dark square bishop trade, which, as we already discussed, was a bad idea. And this was a nice little tactical combination, and also highlighting why h5 is a good move here. So the bishop's pinned. So Dormant finds a nice way to exploit that pin by taking the pawn and then taking the queen, netting white an extra pawn here. So now it's a 2-on-1 majority on the queen side. And I have a bishop versus a knight, and the rooks are still on the board. But it's going to be difficult for me to convert this. At this point, it's already winning for white. The knight can have a nice central square here. There's a lot of pawns on dark squares. These pawns will eventually roll onto more dark squares, which eliminates all the targets for my light square bishop. So I go here, trying to trade off the active rook. And maybe, again, I think this might have been another strategic mistake. Possibly I should have kept both the rook pair on the board, or both rooks. So that way I could try to build more pressure against something. I don't have a clear target yet. Maybe I could come back to target the pawn, but yeah, it gets difficult real quick here. But yeah, this is what I came up with to try to eliminate white's most active piece at the moment. He comes here, attacks the bishop again. Now I put the bishop on this diagonal, forming this little pawn and bishop chain, and preparing to try to hold down the queen side. So he develops the knight to the center of the board. I guess it's not really developing anymore, but he moves his knight to the center of the board, attacking the bishop. And I cannot afford to give up a bishop here. So I try to maneuver the bishop around. And here, a better move would have been to try to get behind. Oh my goodness, I can't draw arrows. Get behind the pawn and try to attack from this way. But seeing it as too risky of a move, I just drop back, and here comes the pawns on the dark squares. And now this bishop has no targets on the queen side of the board, at least for now. So here, with this move, I'm trying to get my king either get to the queen side, excuse me, or at least get to the center of the board and try to help out the poor rook and bishop here, trying to hold the whole position down. But unfortunately, all these king moves are just bad, and it allows more activity for white's pieces. And then this is another point where I set up. I'm trying to defend the rook, or I'm trying to defend this pawn actively by getting to the side of the pawn to try to put pressure here, so there's no a4 at least for now. But I am notice that the position of these two pieces, which means there can be a knight fork here or a knight fork here, and it's just game over. And if this was something that I noted in the game of this knight fork, but I wasn't worried about it because of these two pieces guarding it. But I move here, trying to relocate the bishop back to this little pawn chain to try to slow this all down. And then the knight comes here, attacking my bishop. So then, I move the bishop, but I missed the critical move here. Again, these two squares, right? The knight can jump to this square next, so the bishop has to go here to guard the square, and then we just trade the pieces. But I missed this, and boom, that's game over. I decided to resign here because the rook's going down, and there's really no way to stop these two pawns, right? Like the rook just comes behind this pawn, the knight maneuvers to attack the pawn, and he can just get rid of this pawn and push connected passers against the king and a bishop, and there's no way. The computer rates this as plus 9.3 for white here. Anyways. But yeah, I think this was a very instructive game, at least for me. I think the main takeaways here were, one, to, I guess, yeah, not get impatient about a position. To, especially with the bishop pair where you have that long-term advantage, to play more of a maneuvering game and keep the pawn structure solid, opposed to trying to fling pawns down the board and break the structure. Two, I think I missed the f5 move, right? To, one, gain the tempo on the queen, and two, support the pawn that was on e4 and form a nice little pawn chain to relieve my bishop from that task. And then three, I think just I didn't think this was generally like a bad opening idea, but there's definitely some improvements that I could do in the opening itself here. I think one is going for this c4, and then if I want to go for that queenside expansion, do so in this manner with b5, a5, and then b4, attacking this pawn with a big pawn chain. But yeah, I hope this game was as instructive for you as it was for me, and have a great rest of your day.